Listen up, interns. Time to lance this historical abscess. Let's see what those self-righteous holy men are actually hiding under their expensive robes besides gold and hypocrisy. Lock and load, interns. We're going in. Oh, excuse me. Hope I didn't interrupt you robbing the pier. Imagine a corporation with no factories, no farmlands of its own, and not even a full-scale army capable of defying the great powers. Yet for centuries, the kings of the mightiest empires lined up at its doorstep just to kiss the ring of its leader. This is not a story of magic or divine providence. It is a story about the creation of the most perfect structure in human history, which was the first to realize that the most profitable commodity in the world is not gold, not silk, and not spices. The most liquid asset is human fear of eternity. We are used to looking at the Vatican through the prism of religion and art, but let's set aside the sacred texts for a moment and pick up a calculator. At the peak of its power, the papacy managed financial flows that would make modern Wall Street titans blush with envy. The Vatican didn't just collect donations. It created the world's first global bureaucratic machine, where every human transgression had its clear, mathematically calculated market price. The ultimate paradox was that an organization officially preaching poverty and humility managed to become the largest holder of capital on the planet. How did they achieve this? They invented a brilliant mechanic, the monetization of the invisible. While monarchs fought over real castles and plots of land, wasting colossal resources and the lives of soldiers, the Vatican traded in real estate in the afterlife. Indulgences were not just pieces of paper with seals. They were the first high-liquidity securities in history, backed not by gold reserves, but by a collective total belief in the fires of hell. Every act of penance turned into a transaction, and every altar became a payment terminal in the most extensive financial network of the Middle Ages. Let's look into the internal mechanics of this system. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe plunged into chaos. Dozens of minor chieftains and feudal lords fought over resources, but they lacked the most important thing: legitimacy. The Vatican made a masterstroke. It offered not force, but the right to power. The Pope declared himself the sole mediator between God and earthly rulers. From a business perspective, this was a strategy to create an absolute monopoly on the issuance of licenses. Want to be a king? You need Rome's sanction. Without it, you are just a highway bandit whom any neighbor can kill without a second thought. This license came at a price, a steep one. Thus, the Vatican created the world's first franchising system. Every monastery, every parish in the most remote village was a branch of the central office in Rome, and every such branch dutifully collected the tithe, a direct tax of 10% on any income. Imagine a modern corporation receiving a tithe from the GDP of the entire Western world, without incurring costs for police, medicine, or defense. This was pure, unadulterated profit flowing into a single center, creating an unprecedented concentration of capital. But the tithe was not enough for the appetites of the empire of the spirit. The real breakthrough in revenue happened when theologians developed the concept of purgatory. This was a world-class marketing masterpiece. People were told, even if you are not a complete villain and haven't gone to hell, you will still suffer for thousands of years, washing away sins in an intermediate world before seeing the light of heaven. But, and this was the decisive but, the Church could shorten this term. Thus, a price list for salvation appeared. In the Vatican, entire departments of legates sat composing detailed tariffs. Murder cost one amount, adultery another, perjury a third. Sin ceased to be a moral category and became a financial entry. The Vatican literally traded in time, the very resource that a human being does not have. It was the perfect business model. The product cannot be touched, it cannot be returned under warranty, and the quality of the service is physically impossible to verify until the consumer's death. The system was so well thought out that it allowed for the redemption of sins not only for oneself, but also for deceased relatives. It was a market with infinite demand. To manage these mountains of gold, the Vatican had to become the primary bank of Europe. The Bible explicitly forbade lending money at interest, calling it a mortal sin. But how then to make capital work? Rome showed miracles of legal equilibrium that today would be called offshore schemes. Instead of lending at interest, the Church framed it as a gift in gratitude or created a system of bills of exchange. The Vatican became the first clearing center where you could leave gold in one city and receive it in another, paying a transfer fee. While feudal lords lived in the dark Middle Ages, the Vatican was already operating with the tools of transnational capitalism. Papal agents controlled the salt market, the alum market, necessary for dyeing fabrics, and even the food market. If a king needed money for war, he went not to merchants, but to papal bankers. In return, Rome received not only money, but also political concessions, lands, and monopolies. The Church turned into the lender of last resort, which, in case of debt default, could confiscate not property, but the soul of an entire nation. To maintain such an empire, an unprecedented information network was required. And here, the Vatican had no rivals. The system of confession became the prototype of the most effective intelligence agency in history. Every king, every minister had a confessor appointed or approved by Rome. Everything whispered in confessionals. Everything discussed behind the closed doors of bedrooms flowed to the Vatican. The Pope knew about the state of the French treasury, conspiracies in England, and the illnesses of emperors before their own heirs did. Information allowed for the manipulation of markets. If a monarch became too rebellious, the Pope had a nuclear suitcase, the Interdict. This was a ban on all church services in the country. In the state, children stopped being baptized, and the dead stopped being buried. In a society where faith was the foundation of life, this meant an inevitable uprising. The people, fearing to be left without heavenly protection, would overthrow the ruler themselves. The Vatican did not need legions. A single sheet of parchment was enough to turn a powerful monarch into an outcast. This was power over reality, where the word of one man in Rome could halt the life of an entire nation. However, any monopoly sooner or later reaches the limit of its effectiveness. By the beginning of the 16th century, the Vatican had become so cynical that it stopped caring about maintaining its image. The construction of the massive St. Peter's Basilica in Rome required astronomical funds. The sale of indulgences turned into aggressive multi-level marketing. Preacher monks traveled through German lands with collection boxes, shouting advertising slogans. As soon as the coin in the box clinks, the soul from purgatory jumps. This was the moment when greed finally swallowed meaning. Europe's intellectuals saw not a holy sea, but a bottomless funnel draining national wealth for the luxury of Italian cardinals. The climax came when popes began to sell church offices, turning the hierarchy into an auction. Martin Luther's Reformation was not just a theological dispute over the interpretation of Scripture. It was the largest revolt in history of shareholders against corrupt management. National elites realized it was much more profitable to create their own pocket churches than to send gold to Rome. Half of Europe left the holding, and the Vatican forever lost its status as the sole ruler of the Western world. But the paradox is that it did not disappear. Having lost political power and lands, the Church carried out the most successful rebranding in history. It transformed from a financial tyranny into a guardian of moral values and cultural heritage. It became soft power, long before political scientists coined the term. The Vatican realized that owning minds is much more profitable than owning lands. Today, the Vatican is not just a museum. It is an organization with an incredible portfolio of hidden assets, stocks, and real estate worldwide. But their main capital is 1,000 years of experience in managing human consciousness. They were the first to prove that soft power, built on the control of information and fears, always turns out to be more durable than steel. Empires collapse when they run out of soldiers or resources. But a structure that has written its rules inside the human psyche can exist forever. The lesson of the Vatican is simple and terrifying. The most durable prison is the one a person enters voluntarily, believing they are buying freedom for their soul, while in reality they are simply paying the bills of those sitting in quiet offices behind high walls. And as long as humanity fears the unknown, the cash register of this invisible enterprise will never be empty. Today, the functions of indulgences have been taken over by other structures selling us relief from anxiety. But the mechanics remain the same. You give real gold for the promise of a comfortable future that no one can guarantee. The history of the Vatican is a mirror reflecting our eternal readiness to pay for the illusion of control over what is beyond us. It is a grand lesson on how to turn the intangible into the hardest gold in the world. Lectures over, interns. Smash like, unless you want unpaid overtime in the dark ages. Hit subscribe to keep my portal fueled. Next jump, we're hunting the ultimate white gold. Trust me, the history of sugar is anything but sweet. Gotta recharge. Later.